Thought for Teacher, welcome to the podcast, yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Thought for Teacher, the show that takes big ideas in theory and education and boils them down into punk rock danceable sound bites. I'm your host, Katie Spradley, a 6th grade teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, and current graduate student at UGA, working towards my educational specialist degree in English education. In today's episode, we will discuss some of the questions posed from this year's National Council of Teachers of English Justice Dialogue, as well as respond to a heady read by Zeus Leonardo and Ronald K. Porter entitled The Pedagogy of Fear. Our guest today is Donna Robertson. She is a retired educator and principal with over 30 years' experience in leadership in diverse school settings. Donna spent time as a special education teacher, ESL teacher, administrator, all in her 3 decades of service. After retirement, she joined the faculty at GSU, developing and teaching the ESOL endorsement and focusing on diversity training. She has a passion for developing interdisciplinary units, especially centered around multicultural children's literature. She also is great for a conversation digging into the nitty-gritty when it comes to issues of race, identity, privilege, and educational justice. Oh, and she's also my mom. Lucky me. Welcome, Donna.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I feel very honored.
Well, I'm honored to have you here. Thanks so much for coming on. So, because we're both big nerds when it comes to this stuff, after I did some of these readings for my grad school class, I, of course, thought what any adult daughter thinks, which is, gee, I want to talk about this with my mom. So, I'm glad you said yes. And we've already had some really great thought-provoking conversations centered around these articles. And the first one was a heavy hitter called The Pedagogy of Fear. So to provide our listeners a little background, Frantz Fanon was a French Afro-Caribbean philosopher and psychologist from Martinique who has been influential in post-colonial studies, critical theory, Marxism. He was concerned with the psychopathology of colonialism and consequences of decolonization. So he talked about the necessity for violence in the decolonization process, which was jarring to read about at first when we were thinking about a classroom setting.
Gave me a lot of food for thought. I guess I would start with that whole idea of violence because it hit me the same way. It's like I was really pushing against that at first.
Same.
Because I had my own idea of what violence is. But when he explained revolutionary violence versus repressive violence, I realized it was really important for me to accept that in order to understand his theory and be able to apply it as an educator.
Yes, I had that same visceral reaction. I have annotations right early in my article where I was like, violence, why does it have to be so abrasive?
Violence.
Yes, and I think that became part of the point is I'm supposed to feel that uncomfortable, yucky feeling. That's the revolutionary moment happening within me when I have that reaction.
Yes, and it really gave me a way to think about the difference between revolutionary violence, which is not sanctioned by society, and the repressive violence, which is sanctioned. And it helped me see the whole Black Lives Matter issue in a different frame. And so I thought it was a useful theory.
Yeah. How do you feel like that distinction between the two types of violence, how do you feel like that applies in a classroom teacher as an educator? Because I feel like we can't help but read these articles thinking I want to go tomorrow and apply this, or reflecting back on our experience in the classroom and thinking about how did this apply or not apply?
I guess I think back to my days when I started teaching at Georgia State University, and my chair approached me and asked me to teach these courses on diversity. And I really felt unprepared, and I told her that. I said, I feel like diversity is a legitimate academic subject that I have a lived experience, is the author would say, a lived experience, but I really didn't have the academic background, nor the training, the psychological training on how do you talk about these kinds of issues. So I immediately started thinking back to how I perpetrated this uncomfortable, the safe space.
Let's talk about that safe space.
Okay, because that's what I felt like I was doing, because that's what I thought I was supposed to do, is create this safe space where you don't get angry, you're supposed to have certain, rules of civility, and I didn't recognize at the time that I was actually just providing a safe space for my white students and myself, and not for the people of color, the marginalized groups that were in my class.
I think that is the heart of the article. For those who haven't read the article, it kind of challenges that idea that a safe space can exist in race dialogue, so that well-meaning teachers will try to have race dialogues, create a quote-unquote safe space, set these parameters, but really what they're doing is upholding kind of racist norms, I guess.
Well, and also I thought a good question at the end of the article was who feels safe and toward what end. So not only who feels safe in the space, but also why am I even having this discussion? I was way over my head. I handled it the best way I knew how to handle it, but now looking back on it, I realized I had unrealistic expectations of that I put on my students of color, and now understand better, the dynamics that I had set up.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting hearing your personal experience with the exact topics in this article, and it is a tricky spot that we, for the listeners who can't see us, are both white women. For the well-meaning white women of the world who are often in classrooms, did you get a sense from the article that there is a way forward, or like how should, if we even should be having these conversations, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the article doesn't really say or give a solution per se, but they do make the point that the purpose of the discussion should not be just to make white people feel uncomfortable or to make black people feel more empowered. There has to be. So I guess it goes back to, as a teacher, what is your goal of even having this conversation? Being mindful that having the conversation at all is an act of violence for people of color. So there has to be a really good reason to do it.
But what do you think about the act of not having the conversation as a form of violence? Because a lot of these articles, we'll get into more of them, do talk about that silencing, and sometimes not speaking about topics is also a choice that can perpetuate racist norms or a sense of violence.
I guess one of the questions I have in my mind is that as a power differentiation between the teacher who is setting everything up the way that I'm a white teacher. Am I setting this up? I have to really think hard about to make white people feel more comfortable. Am I willing as a white educator to feel that uncomfortable, or put myself in a situation where I'm not sure I know the proper way to interact or handle the issues that will come up? So I think a teacher has to have done a lot of thinking and understanding of the dynamic, the power dynamic and the racial dynamic. So there's a lot of preparation, I think, and confidence that the teacher has to have.
Sounds like it's not to be taken lightly. It takes a lot of courageous and willing to be risk. And will you share that quote that you were talking to me about that kind of deals with risk and the role of the classroom?
Well, yeah, he was basically saying that the transformative learning only happens when you do take those risks and when you do feel uncomfortable, and that those feelings are necessary. It's not something you should say you can't do because this is a safe space, but you should be encouraging people to feel those things and express those things. And I thought it was interesting the way he said that if you do set your discussion up for the comfort of white students, that you're letting the least competent students guide your discussion. And you wouldn't accept that in any other situation, but your ceiling is, how much can the white students take? Not, let's explore the lived experience of the people of color that would add so much more richness and authenticity to the dialogue.
So the discomfort of the white students is a necessary violence, and that brings us back to that whole violent thing.
Exactly.
That feeling of ugh, this is yucky, I'm uncomfortable, is the point, and that's how the transformation occurs.
Exactly. And then later, I know we're going to be talking, I think, maybe about multicultural literature and
that's your wheelhouse.
Yeah, and the role of multicultural literature. So I can't help but think that one strategy a teacher could use who maybe doesn't feel completely competent in this is picking a piece of literature that brings up a lot of these subjects, and you can discuss it as part of these other characters' issues, and it's not so ego-driven.
Highlighting the personal identities of the classmates, but they could maybe like feel safe to connect if they wish to.
The different situations and characters.
Yeah.
And I think that I've grown a lot from and changed my opinions about things based on books I've read.
Yeah.
So I do think it can be a powerful tool.
That's why probably they're considered so dangerous.
Right, the ones that are banned.
Subject to bans, yes.
Right.
Well, the Pedagogy of Fear wasn't on the agenda, actually, for the NCTE's Justice Dialogue, but I decided my teacher recommended it, and I wanted to read it as an appetizer. I don't know why. That was crazy, because it is a whole entire
meal.
It's a whole 7-course meal on its own, but I am really glad that I did read it, and I'm glad that you read it, and I think our conversations about it really inform, like, these next articles and add, like, a richness to that. So these other articles really confront the issues facing the classroom, like, that are happening on the battlefield today. And I know these issues are really important to you. So I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about censorship in today's classrooms and the implications as you see them.
Well, things have changed so much politically since I started, because my first year of teaching was in 1971.
But you guys had your own issues and
absolutely.
Things that probably were like taboo.
Oh, absolutely. But I will say that I think the role of the public school teacher was more well-defined back then. And we had a lot more wiggle room, what I call wiggle room, where I could close my door and kind of do what I wanted. Parents were involved in a certain way, but not the way they are today. And public education was recognized, I think, more as the domain of what's good for the public, and not so much what each individual parent thinks their child should be learning or not learning. I just do feel like that the respect of teachers was more back then. I didn't feel challenged by parents that much. Of course, I will add that I was teaching special education in those days, and so that was maybe a little different than being a regular classroom teacher. But I had a lot of wiggle room.
Mm-hmm. So did you encounter censorship that you remember
in
your career?
Oh, when I moved to Atlanta as a 21, 22-year-old, very naive, and I taught in East Point, Georgia. I won't name the name of the school, but it was an all-white kind of working class to underworking class kind of community. And in February I came and I put up a bulletin board about Abraham Lincoln, and my principal came in and told me to take it down.
Why?
Because Abraham Lincoln was not someone celebrated in that town in Georgia.
Jeez.
Yeah, so I was totally miffed by that. I mean,
Yeah.
in those days, we literally celebrated and got a day off for Confederate Memorial Day, but we did not get the day off for Memorial Day.
Wow.
That's 1971. That kind of censoring. But not so much like you can't read this book or that book.
I was going to ask if like you ever remember somebody challenging a book that you chose, because I know you loved your multicultural literature and you read a lot of
Well,
books
that would be further
highlighted.
on in my career, because I switched from being a special ed teacher and then went into ESL, and that's when the multicultural literature really took hold. But once again, I was teaching a targeted community of immigrants. Mm-hmm. So it was a little different. It wasn't reading.
So maybe like those parents didn't have the like time, resources, or desire to challenge.
Or they appreciated,
control.
They really appreciated the value of the multicultural literature. I remember a little Vietnamese girl who was about 6 or 7, and I had just read a book about a Vietnamese character, which back in the 80s was very rare. I mean, today I think there's a lot more of that. And afterwards, she came up to me and she said, "Miss Robertson, I love ESOL."
Aww.
And I know what she meant was I loved that I got to see myself in a book.
Yes, the windows and mirrors, they're always coming back.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think I was encouraged by my
That
situation.
feedback. Yeah.
And yeah.
And it's interesting because you were in a situation where you're providing those mirrors to your students because you had a mostly diverse population teaching ESL. But I wonder about the value of those windows for the white kids that were at your other school who wouldn't let you put up a poster of Abraham Lincoln. Like, what are they actually missing out on? Because I wonder if you had tried to read those same books, if you would have experienced pushback.
Well, I will say that I actually had this project that I would take my ESOL students and we would have what we called a culture card. So I would do, let's say, Mexico. So I had a lot of kids from Mexico. So my Mexican students would help me create this card. We'd have music, food, whatever, and we'd take it to the regular classroom.
Cute.
And we'd do a little 30-minute thing that they would present about their culture.
Aw, I love that.
And it was very well received. I never got any pushback at all from that.
You know, I think that's like what the dominant culture enjoys about other cultures and diversity, because it doesn't challenge their like power or, you know, their place.
You're not being felt uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're enjoying the like diversity versus being asked to consider yourself in the like big picture of justice and inequality and stuff.
Right.
That is so interesting. So how do you think like that type of censorship, would that be different today? Do you feel like teachers are looking at like a different type of censorship?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the stakes are way higher. I mean, I just think of the Cobb County teacher who lost her job because she read a particular book to her students. You know, just a very few parents can dictate to a teacher what they can and can't teach. And even if you're not feeling that pressure overtly, you are thinking about it almost always.
Like, maybe I better not do this.
Yeah, exactly. Or what do I say? This kid just asked me about, you know, a gay transgender issue, and am I allowed to answer this, or am I breaking a DEI law?
Yeah.
You know, and am I going to be challenged by a parent that's going to be upset, and then is my principal going to support me? And, you know, it's very silencing.
The article about like lots of ways to be brave, a teacher's guide to facing censorship, you know, it tries to offer these like step-by-step things that teachers should be able to follow, but man, that is a lot of expectation on teachers to just like go in every day and like feel that adrenaline of like
fear,
risk and fear. And like, man, that's asking a lot.
Yes, and it brings up this whole idea of teacher training, getting teachers trained to handle these situations. Because one thing I noticed coming from the K-12 environment and then going into the college environment, university environment, is how sometimes there was such a big disconnect of what we were teaching our teacher trainee, you know, people that were learning to be teachers. And I knew in my heart that this is not applicable in a real classroom, you know. So there was a disconnect there. So why didn't we ever train teachers to deal with what we knew they were going to face from the classroom?
The actual hard stuff.
Yeah, the actual hard stuff. And how do you deal with these hard conversations? How do you talk about racism in the classroom? How do you negotiate all the fear?
Yeah. You know what I think so hard about that is that there's this move to standardize everything so that everyone gets the same. How do you standardize those types of experiences and transformative conversations? Like, is there a playbook or a guidebook that's possible? It's a lot on like individual judgment.
Well, that's true. That's why teachers are so important, because it is their judgment. Teaching is an art and a science, and you can teach the science part, but you can't teach the art part. So that is the art of teaching, is knowing how to respond in those situations. But I do feel there's a place for teacher training. That I'm talking about the day after.
Yes, let's talk about that article. It's called "Why Did We Never Learn This? Preparing Educators to Teach for Justice and Equity on Days After." So to give our listeners a little background, Days After Pedagogy, or DAP, deals with the question of why, when important or traumatic historical moments occur, teachers feel unsure and not confident about how to, or even if to, address those moments in the quote-unquote days after, which kind of leads to a deafening silence on topics that kids know really matter, but what does it mean that my teacher never talks about it, or all those and why do teachers not talk about it? Should there be preparation for them? And I really thought about you when I read this article, because I remember you telling me specifically how when you were a student, that strange feeling you had when the teachers never brought up the Vietnam War, they didn't bring up issues going on in the civil rights movement. And I'm just curious, how do you remember experiencing like days after as a student and later an educator?
You know, I graduated high school in 1967. It was at the height of the civil rights movement. It was the height of the Vietnam War. And literally, I was taking a history class then, and all we talked about was like the Civil War, the Revolutionary War.
They didn't connect it like, gee, I wonder how the Civil War could possibly connect to the Civil Rights Movement.
Or how is this your lived experience? I mean, here are men, boys, that were about to face being drafted into the Vietnam War, but we never mentioned it in school. It was crazy. Or even as a younger child, I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, where that was the duck and cover years, where you were trained, like now they have those drills for shooters, which is so horrible. I mean,
we don't do those in my school.
Now we have drills for, then we had drills for bombs. Like, there was a drill, you had to get under your desk, like that desk was really going to protect you. But I was scared to death, and then we'd go home, and I'd hear on the news about the Cubans were going to, that the Russians were going to bomb us. And I was really terrorized.
As a little kid, you're just left to draw your own conclusions.
Yeah.
And that silence on the behalf of the adults speaks volumes. Yeah. Like, why is no one
And even my parents were like, don't worry about it, honey. It's nothing that's going to affect you.
Yeah.
And didn't really trust my ability to understand the situation, I guess.
You know, I had that thought while reading the article that days after pedagogy is a joint responsibility, because it's also a days after parenting that needs to occur simultaneously with the teacher. Like, it's not all on the teacher to help kids cope and understand traumatic social events, right?
Well, I'll bring it closer and say that I was the principal at 9/11. And boy, talk about not being prepared to what to do. I wasn't even on campus that day because ironically, I was taking a workshop by the Defamation League on not being biased, but anti-biased education. And here I was, and this woman that was the head of the workshop had to say, I hate to tell you this, all, but we think a bunch of Arabs just bombed the World Trade Center. Anyway, so I was off campus, and it took me hours to get back on campus. So the first thing I did, which I didn't know what to do, is I called my assistant principals and said, tell all the teachers to turn off their TVs. So my first directive was turn off your TV, that we will find a way to get the teachers informed. But right now, at this moment,
take care of.
Yeah, let's just make sure we're not exposing kids to trauma. So let's just turn off the TV. And that was about all I could muster at the time.
Did you have to think about what to do the days after? Were you like, okay, let's have a game plan. Let's talk about it. What did you do after?
It's so funny because I've really given this thought since you asked me to have the conversation, and I'm drawing such blanks.
I remember.
I do remember we had I had to get a letter or something out to the parents that day before the kids left to say, this is how we handled it. And this is some suggestions. My counselor was really, really a important person, and she got together tips, here's how you can discuss this. These are some
different
things.
ages, because you taught elementary.
Right. Yeah, so, that was about all that we could do, and I think we were told by the county administrators to not get deep into it. Defer it to the parent, defer it and say, well, sounds like a good discussion for you to have with your parent tonight. So I think that's probably what we did.
And yeah, I remember 9/11 as one of my days after as a student. I was probably in 9th grade, and as I remember it, we were in French class or something, and either we went to the library or we were already in the library, but somebody wheeled in a TV and turned it on purpose. And we were older then, but I don't know if the teachers had any skills in their toolbox or anything to deal with it. And in fact, they were also traumatized themselves.
Exactly.
And I think that's the other thing that's hard about days after pedagogy. It's I'm also traumatized by what I just saw or what's going on. You might know
somebody that's affected.
Yeah, and then when it comes to racial violence, that is such a reality in our culture. It's so hard to tread that line, because then you get all the way back to the pedagogy of fear, where it's are we going to have these racial conversations? Because kids are asking legit questions why was that child shot in the park?
Exactly.
Well, it's because he's black, but can I say that? The police officer is black. This whole conversation is just real tricky.
So I guess it goes back for my question is, why aren't teacher training programs doing this, and why aren't schools post-grad, schools and school systems should say this is a reality. Now we know it's a reality between the shooters and, all of this violence and everything that's going on. The teachers are going.
So should there be a framework? Is it even possible to make one? Maybe some type of, here's how you, based on the different age
at least have the discussion of how you might handle it, so you at least have a script in your mind of what I might do.
Yeah.
But to be totally unprepared, there's really no good excuse why this isn't part of the curriculum. Mm-hmm. But part of it is, if you do that, then you're admitting, as a school system or as a nation or as a culture, that there are these issues, like shooters. Think of just the politics of guns.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And we're so obsessed with keeping uncomfortable topics under wraps, right?
It all kind of
full
comes
circle,
together.
doesn't it? Dang. Well, I wish we had more time, because there's always so much more to talk about. And I always have fun talking with you about these topics. As you know, you've really inspired me, my worldview, and I think one of the most important things you've left me with is this idea that we can always stand to learn a little bit more, that we're not fixed in what we know and what we're able to do. And we can always reflect and adjust our understanding of things, understand other people, and adjust our behavior to try to create a more just future. So thanks for instilling that in me. And thanks for helping me be
thanks for being such
educator.
a good student and such a great daughter.
Aww,
I'm so proud of you.
You're the best. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. There's so much we did not have time to get into, like our response to why colorblindness will not end racism from MTV News. So stay tuned for next time as we inquire into the forms color evasiveness has taken in our lived experiences and as educators. Don't forget to like and subscribe on social media at Thought for Teacher, and leave us a comment with your responses. We love to hear from you.